Welcome to the Encouragement Engineering Podcast, where we help people to combat the negativity that inundates their daily lives with a positive perspective and positive action. Today's guest is Jeremy Doran. Jeremy is a recent author and a business leadership and retirement coach. Jeremy believes continuous improvement comes from school, work, family, improv, and challenging yourself to expand your limits. Figuring out how those lessons can be applied to business life is something Jeremy prides himself on. Jeremy helps business owners get control of their businesses and their lives so they can take vacations without worry, monetize their business, and plan for an actual retirement. What a concept. And because you can't take a vacation because you don't own a business, it owns you, and you don't want that. So Jeremy's here to help us explain that. So please welcome to the show, Jeremy Doran. Jeremy, thank you for taking the time today. I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here myself.
Good. Well, why don't we get right into it for the people listening? Let's tell them about you and how you got to where you are, because that's part of the interesting part of your story too.
Yeah, it's a long and winding road. So I'm the youngest of 10 kids. And, as I said in the book, there's a lot to learn from that type of interaction. My degrees are actually in engineering and psychology. Never really did either one, but I use everything that I learned there every day. So I've worked in small businesses, large businesses. I've lived overseas and worked there. So I've a lot of different perspectives, and I like to bring those to people.
And that's great, because I think what's, one of the most intriguing things is you're the youngest of 10 siblings. I mean, that's like survival of the fittest, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I made it.
There you go. Yeah, you survived. I grew up with a family of 11 down the street from us. And it was always that same thing is, if you got to the dinner table and that food came around once, you were grabbing some because it wasn't coming around a second time.
Yeah, we all had strategies for how to get enough of the food we wanted.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Now, from that experience, I mean, let's take that into, if you will, the real life scenario. I mean, being the youngest of 10 and everything like that, you had to possibly overcome some fears. What are some things that you learned from that scenario, both, overcoming fears and basically how to survive? It seems like you've took on some challenges and you've gone after it a lot.
So, speaking of the dinner table, and getting as much as you wanted, I was the youngest. So everyone could get as much as they needed. Yeah. So everyone got one serving, but getting the second serving was a trick. I couldn't eat as fast as them. My arms weren't as long as theirs. So me getting a second serving of something everyone wanted was not likely. But every meal she made 2 vegetables, always corn, because people would eat corn. I requested lima beans as often as possible because no one else liked lima beans. So what I did was I actually made a niche for myself. And it's something that everybody talks about in business. I learned that at the dinner table.
That's a great concept. Wow, you think about that. Yeah. Pick the thing nobody wants to do, and that's where you'll make a lot of money.
Yep. As long as you like doing it.
Yeah. And sometimes, like you said, it's just survival because nobody else is going to do it. So,
yeah.
And that brings up a good point, though, because if you're doing that, I mean, that takes some gumption, if you will, to go after that because, nobody wants to do it. Everybody might complain about it. Eating lima beans, they are not my favorite, I got to tell you, but, they're good substance for you. We know that. But how did that translate into what you do today? Tell us about that.
Talking about niches, doing something either that other people don't want to do. What I do is a combination of both business coaching and retirement planning. Mm-hmm. And I made myself a niche that way because it's something that most people don't combine. We were super competitive growing up. I was never going to be the fastest runner. I was never going to be the fastest biker, but no one else really swam. So I started doing triathlons, and guess what? I'm the fastest triathlete in my family. Yeah. So sometimes combining disparate things in order to make a niche can help you be successful.
And that's, wow. Okay. How can people look at that? I mean, you come from an interesting background, mechanical engineering and psychology. Like you said, you use those in your business, I'm sure, because you got to think of your psychology helps you think the mindset. What's it doing? How's it thinking of things? What do people, what are some of their fears? And then your experience with wealth management and financial planning, if you will, that's where the reality and the rubber meets the road, the numbers, that the money and so forth. And that's what people are interested in. How does, when you're combining all that, how does that come out in value to your customer and to your businesses?
When people talk about their goals, they usually are just focused on a number. They say, I want to grow by 20% or whatever the number is. So one thing that I do, having multiple perspectives, is I ask, well, why do you want to grow 20%? And I keep asking why, because they say, well, then I'll make so much money. I'm like, well, what are you going to do with the money? They're like, I'm going to do this. Like, is there another way you could do it? So looking at both the numbers and the money and what drives you and how to get there is what really helps people achieve what they really should be achieving, not just what most people think they should be achieving.
And that's a great perspective. Is achieve what you should, not just what you expect. I mean, there's more than one way to slice a pie. We know that. And I like the concept you talk about is that multiple why, because that really gets down to your emotional core. The other thing is that different perspective you bring from your experience, the growth, the opportunity, and exit strategy. So many people think, they forget about, oh, what if I want to get rid of this or eventually stop doing it someday? There is an exit strategy. Is there value in that? Is there a way you help people, for instance, they want to go into, I don't know, whatever type of business, balloon animal making, and they want to make a big business out of it. Is there a way you can guide them to say, maybe you don't want to do that? I mean, how do you approach something like that? Because I'm sure you've seen some areas that the path ends in a brick wall.
Yeah, if you begin with the end in mind. So again, I look at what people want to get out of it eventually, and then kind of backtrack from there. I'm sure people who started a business doing something they love, and then all of a sudden what they love is a job.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll help people look at it from that point of view. Yeah. And what I always tell everyone is that the goal is not to retire. The goal is to be able to retire. Once you're able to retire, your work is a lot more fun. Yeah. And as a business coach, I'll help people figure out, maybe you don't want to sell the business when you retire. Maybe you want to find a way to monetize it, have other people run it, and you can keep making a profit from it. So there's a lot of ways to get where you want to go, but having an outside perspective to step back and look at it is usually very helpful for people.
And it's great information, because that's where I think some of the key people, you're in that realm as well. I always remember my dad saying he had his own business, and he said the key three people you want to have with your business are a banker, a lawyer, and an accountant. Those that you bring that realm to that, you fit right in there to look at all those areas, if you will.
Yeah, and as much as I can collaborate with those people, I really like to and try to as much as possible.
Right. Yeah. It just all comes into play. I mean, I know some of the things you need to look at too. I mean, and there's insurance people, insurance plans for the key stakeholders. You can look at life insurance, all that scenario for people for longevity. And I'll throw this plug out there because it's necessary. Everybody needs some type of life insurance. Don't overlook that. It's not that you're going to die tomorrow if you get it. It's just a protection in case of an event occurs. None of us are here permanently, but we need that protection for our own sake, not only in our business, but in our personal life. So
yeah, if anyone's relying on you, then you absolutely need it.
Yes. And that's, it's interesting to me that, 55% of the people when they pass away don't have a will. It may be even higher. That's crazy. I mean, it's a document, get it done. It's not that hard. So with the growth of businesses, let's get back to the fear scenario, because it mentions it in I think it's on one of your websites about some of the fears you overcame.
Yeah.
Tell us about that, because I think that's interesting how you did that.
So I'll tell you one story. When my daughter was 6, we were on vacation in Cancun at a Club Med, and they had trapeze there. I am very afraid of heights. And so every time we would walk by it, they would ask, hey, do you want to do the trapeze? And I said, no way. And then on the third day, they got smart and they asked my daughter, they said, "Hey, little girl, would you like to do the trapeze?" She said, "Yes." "Daddy, will you go first?" I'm like, "Oh no." So then it made me totally reframe that fear. And, what's the worst that could happen? I fall into a net and I'll probably be okay. But if
Yeah.
I don't do it, I'm kind of setting a bad example for my daughter. And I was more afraid of that.
Yeah.
So,
Wow. And the alternate perspective, the kids have a way of doing that. That guy was pretty smart,
yeah.
marketing to the kids.
And then after I did it, it was a ton of fun. I get down and she says, "Yeah, I don't want to go anymore." I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh no." But it was great, great for me.
That's funny. But that shows that idea, that mindset that you got to have for your fears. And that can go into starting a business or doing some of the things we talked about previously. How can you help people to overcome that idea of, these, obviously a fear is a movie we put in our mind and constantly play over and over again, but it's never positive. So how do you get them to see the positive piece of that and play that movie in their head?
So I always ask, what's the worst thing that could happen?
Okay.
And the first answer is never actually the worst thing. So then I'll keep pushing them. And they're like, "You're trying to help me do this." I'm like, "I know, but what's the very, very worst thing?" And eventually they get to something that is the worst. And I ask, "Could you live with that?" And their answer is generally a surprised yes. They could live with it, even if, the failure of the business meant that they had to start all over again and live in their mom's basement for a month.
Hmm.
They're like, "I could do that."
Yeah.
Like, great. Now that the fear doesn't control you anymore, you can start looking at what are the odds that it's going to actually happen. And then, again, look at the fear of what's the worst that can happen if you don't take this risk. Because there's always risks, whether you do something or don't do something. So I have them, once you take that emotion out of it, then they can start measuring and weighing the pros and cons.
And I love that. Take the emotion out of it, because that's where people get hung up on a lot of things, whether you're buying a shirt to, anything, the emotional piece is what drags you down, if you will. You get, you start to worry, you start to what if, woulda, coulda, shoulda,
Mm-hmm.
it's wow. That's great. And what I like too is the understanding of that you have from the psychology piece. And that leads to that from what you just stated. You're getting into their mind and saying, digging deep, the why, and then what is a worst scenario. How do you help people, because to me, you're doing, if you will, Jedi tricks, mind shifting, you're getting into the mindset of everybody with what you do. How do you help them, more, what is the type of mindset you try to guide them to? Is it, get out of your own way, more positive mindset? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I do look at the positives in most situations. Even bad situations usually have a positive. And just one thing that I always say to myself when something is really going wrong, I step back and I think, well, at least this is going to make a great story.
It's a good way to do it. Yeah, just
Yeah.
it's going to make a good story.
But so with people, I tend not to tell them how they should be thinking or feeling. I keep asking questions. And if you listen carefully, then you can figure out what the right questions are to get them to where they need to be.
Would that be something you could document for people? I'm just thinking in the future, or even as a coaching thing, some key questions you want to ask yourself.
I don't know. I've never thought about it, but I feel like it's pretty situationally dependent.
Okay.
Asking good questions is a skill that needs to be developed. It's not as easy as just why.
Right.
You really need to have an understanding of what the person's saying in order to ask the right question to help shake them out of whatever rut that they might be in.
That's it. Okay. So getting them out of the right question. I'm jotting down a lot of notes here because this is good.
One other thing you mentioned earlier is improv.
Yeah.
Improv is actually great practice for that. The theory behind improv is saying yes and. So the yes requires that you really listen to what the other person said. And then you have to assume their point of view. If they say you're on the moon, then you are on the moon. And then the and is taking that and building on it. So if I'm just on the moon, that's not fun. But if I'm on the moon and I'm about to hit a golf ball, well, then I've moved that forward. And asking questions is kind of the same. You really need to listen and pay attention to what they say so that you can look at it from their point of view and then build on it and then ask the right question.
I see. So that gives you a foundation that pretty much similar to their foundation so that you can understand fully what they're going through, thinking, fearing. It puts you in their shoes.
Yeah. So in the beginning, I'm asking questions to help myself understand where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And then I start asking questions to help them understand where they are and where they want to be.
Wow. Nice perspective there, because just that idea of you're shifting the person by asking the questions, which is cool.
Yeah.
And you're helping them understand more of what they're thinking.
Yeah. Because if they tell themselves, then they're going to believe it. If I tell them, they might not.
Yeah. Right. And that's, positive and negative too. So, that's a good way to do it. Wow. Well, you on your website, you talk about an LMI process, and it mentions focusing on the people. I think that's critical. Tell us more about that program, if you would.
It is a top to bottom structure for helping, individual contributors be as productive as possible, helping new managers figure out how to become leaders and how, executives can start being more strategic in building the company. And a lot of it is repetition, because you can go on a weekend retreat and get the fire hose.
Yeah.
And then, the next day it starts slipping away. So we try to keep coming back to it to help people build as they go.
Wow. And it's like you mentioned, it's interesting, individual contributors. So it's throughout the organization then, or individuals as well. I mean, could they sign up for that program?
Yeah. We can do programs with, a number of individuals from different companies, or we can do it with, a group from a large company.
Right.
The thing I love about doing groups rather than individual coaching is that in the beginning, I will be teaching all the lessons, but I always encourage interaction. And my favorite part is when they start interacting and teaching each other, because especially if they're all from the same company, they know things about the company I don't.
Yeah.
And once I can get them to start, teaching each other, that's when I know I've got them.
And that's a good way to do it, because you're not gonna know, like you said, the ins and outs, and you're gonna have those people, couple people maybe in a group that always done it this way, this stuff doesn't work, blah blah blah, and then you have the others that believe it and can see it and can help change that mindset, like you said, where you're not having to do everything, it's the group doing it. And tell us some of the things you go over in that, because I know you have the topics listed on your website and so forth, but I want to make sure everybody understands that.
Yeah, especially with new managers and leaders, I always start with time management. And I refer to that as the oxygen on an airplane. You gotta save yourself first. So until they can get their time management under control, they're not going to be doing any leading and teaching and that sort of thing. And then it goes from there. And delegation is actually a huge part of it. I have a lot of people who, every time I bring up delegation, someone in the group will say, I tried that once, it doesn't work. It's better if I just do it myself. And as I, work through how to do it well, they realize that A, it continues to save them huge amounts of time, and B, it's the way that they teach people. So
Right.
Once you start delegating, then you're teaching someone else how to do what you do or what you have done in the past, and you're empowering them to grow and move forward. So there's a lot more topics, but those are the two big ones.
And delegation is a hard one. I mean,
Yeah.
you get people that are stubborn like me. I'll just do it myself. It's quicker.
Yeah.
Is it really?
So it depends. If it's something that you're only going to do once, it probably is quicker.
Yeah.
If it's something that happens over and over again, then it takes more time up front, but it's an investment. So you're not spending time, you're investing time then.
And that's a good perspective, because even if it's processes where you have to document it, it doesn't take that long to document the process. And then it's done so other people can repeat it further down the line and you can focus on other things. I've run into that before. I look at it this way, eventually I'm going to hit the lotto. And if I'm not there, somebody's, going to have to take over that scenario, because I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say I'm going to get hit by the bus, because I like the positive view. So, hey,
I like the lottery.
Yeah.
But yeah, I tell every manager, I say, try to make yourself obsolete.
Right. Right. Now, with that same concept, though, because like you said, it make yourself obsolete, because you don't have to do the day-to-day tasks. I have a friend of mine has his own law firm, and he goes, look at the value that costs you. What is your hourly billable rate compared to what you're doing? Is mowing your lawn worth $250 an hour, whatever it may be? If it's not, get somebody else to do it at a lower wage.
Yep. I had a client that I really liked, and it was a revelation that she had after we talked about time management. She came in and she was all smiles and said, you know how they say the one thing you can't buy is time? It's a lie. I just bought time by hiring a landscaper and a house cleaner, and now I have 3 more hours a week. Excellent.
Yeah, that is a great analogy. I mean, it's, there's certain things that and half the time they've done it so many times, they do it very well. They can get it done a lot quicker, a lot better than you can. It's, yes, definitely a plus to be able to do that and see that value. And with the value of not only time, I mean, you're talking about how that put that back into the business then, right? If you want to, or in your personal life. Now you have time to exercise.
Right.
Think about that. Wow, 3 hours, you said a week? Okay, there's an hour, 3 days a week. Now you can work out. It makes your body better, makes your mind better. What else can it grow? So it's return and investment, not only for yourself, but for the business. Do you show people how those two relate?
Yeah, well, generally we'll look at what they earn per hour, much like you were saying earlier. And then I say, are you spending $100 to solve a $10 problem?
Right. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Now, how does that work though, when you may have somebody that's, every dime is allocated for something, and they may not have the luxury, if you will, to be able to hire that person to do those things. How do you help them to do that, or seeing it as one thing, but being able to do it's another step? How do you help them to do that?
Well, there's a few different ways to save that time. So if you can delegate it to a person, but a lot of people I work with don't actually have anyone, directly reporting to them.
Right.
I'm like, well, you can delegate in other ways. If there's someone else who's a peer in your organization who is really good at something that you don't like and are not good at, and they can take that over for you, then you can do something different for them. So it's almost like a time barter.
There you go.
But it helps you focus on things that, multiply your time because you're good at them, and take away the things that you really struggle with.
Okay, good. So you build to their strengths and your weaknesses.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Jeremy, tell people where they can find out more about you, your website, information of how they can get a hold of you.
The website's probably the easiest. The website is www.pinnacle-performance.com. And my email is jdoran, JDORAN, @pinnacle-performance.com.
Great. And we'll make sure we have people contact you, about if you have any questions for Jeremy. Check out his website. He's got information out there, as well as, he's got his email that we'll post in the show notes, and have those links for you for all the people to listening to this, so that they can get a hold of you and find out more information about how you may be able to help them. So I really appreciate your time today, Jeremy. Thanks for being a guest on the Encouragement Engineering Podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been great being here.
Great. Thank you. And you have a great day.
You as well.
All right.